So welcome to Cafe Connect. Um, Thank you for being here. Today we're going to have two presentations. First, uh, I am going to present, and then Professor George Farris from Auburn University is going to present. So I'll have maybe 20, 30 minutes to present, and then George will do his presentation. I am an instructor I am Daniel Ronderos. I am an instructor at of interior design at the University of Alabama, and I'm here to present some things I've been working on using AI and and how and where it stems from. So to start, I'm gonna well, share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Well, uh, this whole thing started um, back maybe like 10, 12 years ago when my sister called my parents. She was living in New York. She lives in New York, and she said, "Well, I'm feeling down. I think I have depression." And what she told us about what her feelings were is like we wanted, she didn't want to get out of bed, and she felt bad because she didn't want to get out of bed, but her feeling bad led her going back to bed. So uh, when I heard this, I I understood that basically the um, that depression, well, it's an illness, but I had this bias because I never experienced it, right? And I related it to being lazy, right? I just said, well, if my sister just had a better attitude and is more energetic, she could uh, get over this, right? And I felt bad thinking that because I wasn't able to connect with her and I wasn't able to understand what she was feeling. And I associated what she was telling me with being lazy because that was the feeling that I've had before. So that was my response. And I felt really bad about it. And I couldn't connect with her. And it was something that was like, well, bugging me. It made me feel bad for a long time. Time passed, and in 2022, this happened in the world. And you may remember this first interface, or, well, uh, commercial interface of ChatGPT. And when it came out, I thought, well, this is great. Like, this would save me a lot of time. And afterwards, I started prompting with DALI, made some interesting images. And I thought, well, it makes interesting images, right? Like I can create a unicorn playing volleyball, and I can do a lot of things. But I started asking myself, well, is AI, is this thing a part of streamlining or making my work more efficient, or promising to make my work more efficient? Is it making me a better educator, a better person, a better architect, a better designer? And then I thought about how I felt about not understanding my sister and her depression. And I said, well, her depression must exist somewhere, right? Is that we don't have an exam where we can draw blood and they will tell us, well, you have like between you have 2 milligrams of depression, or however they would measure it. That doesn't exist, right? You cannot get a blood test to tell you how much depression you have and if it's within normal ranges, right? You can't. Or you cannot get an MRI or an X-ray and spot it. And someone telling you, look, that little dot, that's your depression. So I thought, well, depression is a thought, it's something that happens in the brain, right? So what if I could tell my sister, if I could ask my sister to tell me how depression is, if depression was a space, how would it be? Because I have experienced space, and we all have experienced space because we're physical beings, and we all have to interact with space. So when I tell you about I went to a hotel, it was cold and damp. Well, probably you have also been in that kind of spaces, and you will say, well, that is an awful hotel room, right? So we can empathize through space because we have all experienced space. Not like we have. I haven't. I wasn't able to experience depression, so I couldn't understand depression. But I was since I've experienced space. Space can become a universal translator for complex emotions uh, or conditions like depression, right? So I started thinking about the way we communicate with AI and how we can start bringing human intelligence into, well, the act of prompting. So we've all like heard about, well, prompt engineering and maybe prompt design, but I like to think about prompt as the structure of language and how it has a syntax and how we can achieve that syntax by implementing human intelligence through human-centered design or design thinking. Because human intelligence, it's not a universal concept, or it was not universally defined, because some people are better analyzing, other people are better at empathizing, some have are better at doing things, prototyping, some are better at coming up with ideas, some are more empirical and like to test things, but this all compounds into human intelligence. So why can't I like configure, give the syntax to a prompt through human intelligence, through this array of nuanced elements that will build up human intelligence? So I went back to my sister and I said, "Remember that I couldn't, like empathize with you?" And she said, "Yeah, I remember that, and that wasn't nice." And I said, "Yes, I know, and I'm really sorry about it, but I found a way that maybe I can understand what you're feeling when you have these thoughts of depression." And I was doing this research, and there's this method called PRISM, which is a pictorial representation of illness for and self-measure. Is that psychiatrists use it to assess the performance or the impact therapy has on people who suffer like life-changing illnesses. So they measure it. They make a space grid of the feelings and the important elements in people's lives. And then I took the structure of a prompt, how it is recommended to be built, that you must give a task to the AI, provide context, define the format, give it the tone. And I started prompting with my sister to achieve an image of, um, well, of her depression. So I can understand what that space was like. And we started prompting, and we prompted in Spanish, and then we prompted in English, and we used different uh, AI models. That's why we have all of these on the right. We have all of these examples, and we started perfecting this, right? And we got to this image, and now I know this is the space of my sister's depression. And this is not a nice space. And as you can see it in her description, this is an atmosphere that feels heavy, exhausting, frustrating. And it's a frustrating because she describes it as being like trying to walk on a slippery surface. And it's supposed to be fun, but then you feel like you're obligated and guilty to do so. So that's how she felt. But we were able to put it into space. So, like, if you experience a slippery surface, and you have that sense of guilt, and you have just that sense of being overwhelmed, and this idea of being submerged. Well, this is what that meant for her, and we turned this into a 360-degree panorama, so she could navigate it and say, yeah, this is what's in my mind, and this is how I imagine my depression being if depression was a space. So I wanted to work with people who suffer anxiety, depression, other type of things. But I started running into difficult conversations, which I'm not trained for because I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, and I said, well, I think this is valuable, so I turned it into a tool. So this is a tool which I designed and developed for my students, and it's called Dreams, and it's based on the Prism method. And it's, instead of talking about the illness, we talk about the feelings that you connect to a space, the sensations, the materials, the objects that you connect to a space. Because Dreams stands for the drawing representation for auto measure in spaces. So this is a little platform I developed that connects two things: the ideas that make up the space, right? And empathic prompting. And empathic prompting is that prompt structure that I showed you before, on the syntax of the prompt and how it should be prompted, and an AI model should be prompted to produce an image. Um, so this empathic prompting uh, is not only to empathize with the user or your subject, but it's also to empathize with language itself. So sometimes I find that my students, when prompting, they assume that the machine understands what they're thinking, but they have to be very specific. And it's a problem because language is changing, it's evolving into something different. We use terms like LOL to tell people that we find something funny, right? But if you type LOL to a in an AI model and do not explain what that means, well, it will probably understand a different thing. Um, and so on and so forth. We shorten words, we create abbreviations, we use emojis. So language is changing. But the programming language that we're using for LLMs, which is natural language, well, is based on the structure of grammatically correct uh, language. So we need to well, be able to speak and write correctly in order to program these LLMs to produce the images and the results in general that we want. So I created this little app to do this. So I am going to do a little demonstration here. So for example, I want to understand depression. And I confirm this. So the app will say, what would depression look like as a space? And I'll say, well, this is important, say, to my sister. And I'll say, okay, right? And now I need to create my dreams diagram. And for that, I'm going to use uh, I'm going to use my sister's prompt, right? So the first thing the app asks me is to give it a space or a place. Where is it? So this is in very, very, very vast place whose limits are not perceived, submerged. This is where things are happening, right? So I will place this here. And how important was this for my sister? This was very important. So the closer it gets to this little bubble right here is more important, and how big it is how important it is. for the user, in this case, my sister, right? Then I would say, well, this is the sensory circle. I can have several sensations where I can eliminate them. So I have my sensory sensor, my sensory bubble, and I can say, well, this feels heavy, exhausting, frustrating, tedious, and overwhelming. Like walking in a slippery place, right? Which at the same time can be fun, but feel obligated and guilty. So I could create several bubbles for this, right? So maybe I can just say this, take this part of the text, and this is important to for my sister. Each I could have a bubble per feeling, per sensation, sorry. But I can put, I'm gonna just as an example, put this in another bubble and say, well, this is important to my sister in this way. Perfect. So then I'll go to the material. What is this space made out of? This depression space is made out of. So I'll go here and it says, uh, well, it has a thick blue liquid, right? So I will take this and is say cut this and paste this here, right? Thick blue liquid. This is very important also. So I'll put it here. Then I'll say objects. Which objects are there? And I'll go back. And it says that there are large rocks. So I'll say large rocks that are also submerged. So I'll put them with all of this here. Large rocks. Large round rocks. Right. And there's another thing that you mentioned that was and that there's a purple sphere suspended in space. So that's the purple sphere suspended in space. I'll add a location, and I know now because this is an evolution of the first of the first iteration with my sister that this is like under this is like um underwater canyon, right? And the lighting, well, is sunlight peering uh peering through uh from above, peering from above. So this is the type of light that we have. So we have all of these elements where I'm telling the AI and I'm building this map to understand the ingredients that my space has. And then I go into the second stage of my empathic prompting. And it fills out all of these elements that I filled out in the bubbles. And I can add a style. So let's say an abstract composition. And if I want to like an high level perspective or a bird's eye view or a plan section or a floor section or a floor plan, sorry, I will place this here. Maybe have a 2:1 panoramic, and I'll summarize all of this. So the student now has a summary of how the prompt is gonna be like, and the elements that make up the structure of the prompt. And then I'll generate the prompt right here. And I can start editing it, right? So, for example, well, I have Grammarly, and it helps me with the grammar, right? So I'm missing some commas. I'm repeating up several points. The space feels, it says, evokes heaviness, exhaustion, frustration, tedium, overwhelm, like it's a slippery surface. So I'll say, okay, I like those, or I can change them manually. So it goes from all of these elements and it suggests the redaction, right? So I have like some different elements here, and I can select and copy this, Control C, right? And then I'll go to my favorite AI model to generate this image. And while it generates this image, this gives that, I don't know what's happening with my AI. Let's say. So while this creates, I'll show you, I've done this with my students. So for example, here we're doing a project where they fill out the dreams diagram and then they prompt and then they create, I like to call this, not, this is not a mood board or an inspiring image. I call it a mood environment because it provides all of the elements that you want in a space without compromising with a specific reference material, like material references or furniture references. Obviously, it's the student's decision ultimately to see how realistic they want that this type of image. So, for example, this student, well, she wants a very realistic starting point for her project, but I encourage them to find more abstract concepts through the all these different ingredients that the prompt may have. So they are not fixed on a specific style, but they are fixed on an idea of space. So we have different things that uh, the students want to incorporate into their projects from a conceptual point of view, but this sends their uh, their concept, they can visualize their concept in terms of material, space, objects, atmosphere, lighting, all of the elements that the dreams diagram asks them to build up the prompt. This obviously has to do with their declaration of their concept statement and all of these things. So my students, well, they're using this tool and this workflow to create images to ground their project's mood before they start uh, looking for other types of references. They have the essence of the space they want to create. Let's see if it created something. Unfortunately, I don't know what's happening with this, but let's try, we can try something else. I have a couple of minutes, so let's see. Let's see if we can do another using another using um, another model. It's supposed to work with Gemini, but there. Let's say if this the obviously the result varies with the model you use. I like Gemini because it provides like more accurate um, responses, but ultimately, this is the space that my sister, well, has this gooey like surface. So this is the space that the ingredients of the space that I relate to my sister's depression, which was the inspiration to create this tool that, well, when leveraged, can give my students or any user um, the power to understand its prompting, the contents of a space, and to create this mood environment that provides them with enough information to start their projects. And that's my part of the presentation.
Very nice. Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right.
So we'll wait for the end of the presentation for questions. And now it's George's turn.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniel, and thank you everyone for being here. So my presentation is going to be in a different direction, same topic, but different direction. I'm going to be showing you two small projects that I worked on that where I used AI. The first one is personal work, creative scholarship that discusses the relationship between people and space. And the second one is how I got my students to use AI as part of their as part of a studio project that discusses senses. So let me try sharing my screen. I like to share a portion of the screen so I know where I'm heading. So give me 1 second. All right, I'm just gonna stretch it one more time. So I'm hoping you all can see my screen. This is the project called Chair, or AI focused on it, that I presented before in IDEC and a couple of other places. And this chair was actually at the Jewel Collins Museum in Auburn, Alabama for about 6 months on display there. So it's one of my favorite projects that I worked on. But so the whole idea behind Chair when I started working on it is I was heavily influenced in a lot of my work and a lot of my installation projects and creative scholarship. I'm heavily influenced by Olafur Eliasson. For those who don't know Olafur Eliasson is an architect, designer, and artist at the same time. And he does these really amazing installations where he sets the viewer as part of the installation. What I mean by that is if it wasn't for the person in the room, for the viewer, the work of art doesn't exist. So the first work I've seen of his was years ago, probably over 10 years ago in Chicago. So it was the first time I ever go to Chicago, and I saw this. What you see here is called Rainbow Assembly. It's the picture on the right. Rainbow Assembly is this beautiful project that basically has some sort of mist or water in it, and then you just see rainbow. The idea behind it is if you're not there, the light is not bouncing back off every particle of water and hitting your eye. That means the rainbow does not exist. So if you're not there, the rainbow doesn't exist, which means the work doesn't exist. So this is where he sets up the person as in the middle of that project. But also what's very interesting about it is because it's all played based on perspective and how the light bounces off every particle of water, then someone standing next to you is actually seeing a different rainbow. Even though you're all seeing a rainbow, but it's different direction, different perspectives, it's definitely a different rainbow. So I thought that's pretty interesting that I'm seeing something someone else cannot see and will never see. So I wanted to work with that, but at the same time, I struggled to kind of visualize. And if anything, I'm a very creative kind of like visual person. I like to render things. I like to see things, do things by hand to start seeing them. But at the time, AI and like Daniel was mentioning, the whole image generation was happening. And I thought maybe I can test out or I can work with AI to help me visualize what I cannot see instantly in my brain. So I started by taking on certain parameters, just like any other work you do, any work, any project you do, you have to give it parameters. So I started with mainly I knew that I wanted my project to be visible. I also wanted to work with reflection and refraction. So I knew I wanted to employ light in that way. But at the same time, I want the same idea that depending on where you stand, where your eye is, you're technically seeing something else than someone else, even if you're seeing the same thing, but it's not really the same thing. So I was influenced by or inspired by moss or fungus in this case, because I did not want whatever I'm working on to be like, I did not want the light itself to be the project. I wanted the person to be the project, to be the activator of the project. So I wanted whatever I'm employing inside the space to work like a skin, not to change the character of the space it's in. So when I thought about moss or fungus, there was one time I was in Austin, Texas. I was standing waiting for the bus, and I remember there was a branch, a broken branch on the ground next to the bus stop, and it was filled with a moss on it. But you don't look at this branch and say, "Oh, this is moss on a branch." You just say it's still a branch. It just has moss on it, but it still keeps the identity of itself being a branch. So the idea was, if I have an object, such as a pebble, then the moss would cover it, but you still say it's a pebble. So it does not change the identity. So thinking about that, I wanted to start from something that is very common, something that is very known by everyone, something that culture, age, or so on will not change the identity of it. And that's where a chair came in. Everyone knows what a chair is. Doesn't matter where you're from or how old you are or whoever you are, we all know what a chair is. So I thought, can I mix between the two? Can I start working with a chair and see what would happen if I start using AI to kind of blend these two ideas together and just see where it's going to take me? I wasn't sure exactly where it's taking me at the beginning. I was just really curious. I was enjoying the process more than what it was going to give me at the end. And I thought, I'm pretty sure it's going to trigger certain ideas. So I started with um, a certain iteration where the AI was giving me these really interesting looking chairs with literal mushrooms on it. But I also was very clear about what I wanted from it, such as having these kind of like moss and mushrooms and things coming out of it too. But you still look at it and you still say this is a chair. So I knew I'm actually heading to the right direction, but I wanted more. I was really curious to see what else is going to get me. But at the same time, remember the what I said before is I needed to employ these three steps. So it was not only about making a chair in that way, but I wanted to create these three effects that can relate to the chair. So the next step was to refine some of these iteration. And that's when I was more focused on these Bristol looking things coming out of the chair. I really liked them. I thought there's something really unique about them, and especially that they're not solid. They tend to, change and move, and maybe with the air, they tend to move. So I liked it. So I kept refining that process. And that's when you get to see some of these Bristols is starting to like get more dramatic and then more emphasized. Less moss, less mushrooms, but more of these kind of like Bristols that's coming off. Here's more refinement where these Bristol looking items were really coming out of the piece. And again, this is all was coming from AI. And again, the AI here was employed to kind of trigger ideas in my head. I really wanted the AI to kind of put certain thoughts, to put process in my head that makes me go, oh, what if this is like that? Or what if it's made up from different materials? Or what if it's longer? What if it's shorter? What if? And that made my creative process easier in a way because it was just creating more ideas in my head. So more refinement, and this is more what you can see here on the right. This is where it was really heading toward more light, affected kind of approach. You'll see these bristles now are covering the chair in a really nice way. You see light creating shade and shadow, and certain areas are brighter, certain areas are darker. And that's when I thought, okay, what if now I start actually putting more materials in it? What if it's not more of an images, but there's more materials that can actually give me ideas? So I started maybe saying, what if it's plastic? What if it's glass? What if these bristles are soft? What if these bristles are hard? And I started liking the translucency of it. Not just, I did not want full transparency. I wanted the translucency where you'll see, especially on the left, it was creating some sort of reflection right on the edges of it. And in certain parts that are thicker, it was creating these really nice effects. I really liked what it was heading there, what it was doing there. So I was more intentional about that material, and I thought, okay, now I want it to be more glass. What if there's really more glass-like particles in it that was creating these reflection and refractions? And then at the same time, I was thinking more about light, colors, and so on. So you'll see these are some of the iteration where the materials became more intentional. I knew exactly where this is heading. It was more pointy. And I knew what I wanted to create in that way. The final iteration happened, it looked like this, where these bristles now are much clearer. I knew that this is something that is more plasticky in that way, something that is maybe acrylic, something that allows the light to, in a certain direction, to bounce back, but at the same time to go through. You'll see here, for example, there's obviously transparency here, but you'll notice here there's some sort of reflection. Same thing here, you see some of the reflection, but the denser it is, there's more, lack of reflection and more transparency. So this is where I started working on, okay, how can what are those like? What exactly are these? So it happened that I'm familiar with a material called Duralar, which is some sort of acrylic sheet that is safe to laser cut. I had a cutter, and I'm saying I had because it broke this semester, and I'm going crazy trying to fix it all this semester. So it was easy to just put this Duralar in it and then laser cut it. It was safe. It does not release any toxic smell. So, and this is it. The first iteration was this one Bristol that was bent to the bottom. So I laser cut the edge and then I kind of like engraved just gently so it's easy to crease right there. But I knew it's small. The longer I make this piece, it was folding more. So it was not giving me what I was looking for. So there was a series of iteration. I'm just showing you two here, where I started working on some sort of like a foldable Bristol thing that will allow it to go longer because it created support at the bottom. But the idea was that I can laser cut them and then save up space because two of them could be on the same piece and I can fold them. You'll see the edges and I can fold it to make that piece. And then the first test was actually on a base that was also transparent, like you see here. That was called, the cutting you see here is called lattice hinges. And that allows for flexibility because I wanted, if you go back to this image, I wanted those bristles to go around the edges and not be flat. I wanted to respect the shape of the item. And remember, I did not want to change the idea of a chair. I still wanted people to look at it and realize it's a chair. Here's the first test. It's flat on a table. You'll see how all the bristles are the same height. They're pretty well standing up. You can see clearly how the light is playing in some of these pieces. You'll see light here in the center, for example, and so on, depending on how the light looks like. And I started prototyping and testing it out with curvature. And you'll see here, look at all the reflection, the refraction that's happening here. It was just doing exactly what I was hoping it does, but I wanted to make sure that it's smooth and flexible enough. Here's more tests right here. You'll see how with the curvature, this is a curved surface. You'll see how it's curving with it. That's from the top right there. And here's more tests of the piece and how it just follows my gestures. If I fold it in a certain way, it just respects it and it doesn't just like go against what I'm saying, what I'm doing. Here's more tests with fully curved up, and you'll see I used the more reddish light here just so I can differentiate between the directional light and then other lights that were in the room because there's a curtain right there. And you'll see how nice the light was playing with this piece. And here's where I did an inverted picture where you can see the darker spaces is where the light is affecting that piece. So I knew this is going in the right way. So at that point, I wanted to drop the base, the lattice hinge base. I wanted something more sturdy. And I wanted also to use a chair that is really well known, at least for designers. So there is a chair by Alvar Aalto, and it's an Alvar Aalto stool, actually. And the reason I went for a stool is because the museum wanted that piece like soon, and I could not do a full scale chair. So I needed to do something a little bit smaller just so I could deliver the project to the museum. So the stool was perfect, especially it's a very common stool, and you'll see it in a second. So I started testing 3D printing with the base. And you'll see here, it's kind of translucent base, and it was done in 4 pieces that allows you to put them together so it can create a dome. And I started attaching those bristles right on that dome. I used Gorilla Glue gel here because I found out that PLAs or whatever does not glue well with acrylic. So some of these pieces kept falling, but it was pretty sturdy. And that's the final chair right there. So you'll see here, and I'll click play. That's the chair that is sitting in the room, and you'll see all the effects of light on it. And what's interesting about this chair is it's so sensitive to noise, to motion, to people that are going around it, to the AC, air. Basically, the more people are around it, the more it shakes without touching it. Air even was shaking those bristles. So basically, it was constantly changing. So the idea went back to the beginning where I wasn't talking about elephant liaison. Then yes, you are looking at a stool, you are looking at a chair. but actually all these lights bouncing, every particle going back to your eye is different than the person next to you. So even though you're looking at the same chair, it is not really the same chair. And it was constantly changing. So people was pretty interested in it, and they were engaging with it in different ways. And I noticed that little kids, and there was a lot of kids around that visited, and the museum brought a school once, and they were telling me how kids really wanted to touch that piece because they wanted to get more kind of like connection with it beyond just looking at it. Because also when you touch it, it makes a really nice noise. So it was pretty interesting seeing how people engage with the piece inside of the museum. So that is basically the first thing that I did with AI to kind of like help me trigger ideas and help me identify what can I do to kind of create a piece that is that create a connection between the people and the space they're around. The second one I wanted to discuss is a project that I did in my senior class. This is the third year I do this project. I actually started it 2 weeks ago, the semester. So it is called Spa for the Senses. So the reason I wanted it to be specifically targeting to the senses is because I wanted the students not to look at the spa and create just yet another commercial spa. I did not want them to just create yet just another interior space. I wanted them to really relate to senses, to the well-being, to the mental health of people, to just generally being better as a person rather than just kind of getting a massage or sitting in water and so on. But at the same time, that at that time, AI was very kind of like pretty common, that I also did not want students to just go to AI and say, make me a spa. I wanted to use certain terms that's hard for AI to create, which are senses in that way. So the spa is just basically it's an ethereal, kind of like sensory rich spa. I told them, like, imagine yourself being very tired at the end of the day, and you're coming back to this spa and you just want to feel better. And I told them, if you feel better by just sitting in a calm room and closing your eyes, that's what I want you to get out of this. It's not about just being active all the time. Like, what makes you feel better? What makes you get better? And so on. So it was really targeting the kind of like the feelings and experience more than just the space itself. There was, of course, a series of design requirements. It has to actually engage all five senses, and students will engage all five senses. And it has to have some sort of a theater quality. It's almost like an exhibit or installation or kind of like a communication. And it has to be accessible and so on. So it's realistic in that way. We're not talking about something that cannot be built. Some of the challenges are they have to some sort of incorporate natural elements beyond plants, because I did not want anyone to just use the word biophilic and just put plants everywhere. Biophilia goes beyond just putting plants, but I wanted to make sure they understand that. Also, they have to explore some sort of non-visual elements of design. And again, these are certain things that it gets harder for AI to kind of do it for them, but they can use AI for ideas generating. They have to address universal design principles. They have to become sustainable, sensory rich, like I said, and then also cultural differences, because they get to position this in any place on Earth. So they have to be respectful to the location they're putting it in. The process was very linear in that way, at least not the way they did the project, but the steps of it. So they start with a very small room for one person, and then they make the full project eventually from it. The idea was, if I told the students you have to come up with a full spa, they're gonna look at it like a full piece of cake and they say, I cannot eat this whole cake. It's too big for me. But if you start with a small piece, it's easier for them to kind of like digest a small piece. So they start with a very small room. And once they have the concept for the small room and the materials and the color scheme and all of that, then it's much easier for them to just apply these to the bigger space. It just makes the process so much easier at that point. But before they get into that part, they needed to know what kind of words are they using, right? Like, okay, just like Daniel was explaining, what are they going to put in the prompts? What are those terms? I don't want anyone to just use certain words such as cozy, right? Because what is cozy to one person is not the same as someone else. One person might find cozy to be warm and like under a blanket and it's raining outside. Someone else's cozy is, I don't know, somewhere that is very bright and a strong sunlight on them and big windows and so on. I don't know. So it's cozy is just different. I did not want them to just use these generic terms that really does not identify a certain concept in that way. So I gave them a list of designers, architects, and artists and so on to kind of do as precedents. And so James Turrell, Oilfield License were in the top of the list because their spaces are very ethereal, but also you have Dan Flavin and Team Lab and others. But the idea behind it is they get to learn certain terms from it. So as they're watching videos, as they're researching these people, they're actually taking note of certain words, terms, and concept that comes out of these projects. And that helps them start putting it into these AI image generation thing to trigger ideas. Why even do this? If you're an educator, you know very well that your students do not go and look at precedent work easy. They just want to start with a project. They think they know everything and they just want to start with a project. So I wanted them to first take a step and start generating ideas first before doing. I did not want them to marry their first idea. So first there was an AI generating images just to kind of get them comfortable with AI. Currently students, like after 3 years, I noticed these students are much comfortable with it. So I skipped that step. But when I first started this, they did not even know how to use AI properly. So there was a step where they just look into AI in general. And this is where they were just putting certain prompts and they have to provide me with all these prompts and terms. So, and learning how they can iterate with it. And then the second step would be more, let me show you more pictures actually. So you'll see here they were just generating these pictures and they had to provide me with every prompt. But this is where they were creating, I believe, like about 5 different spaces or 6 different spaces with 5 different iterations each. And just kind of creating these really nice ethereal spaces and getting comfortable with AI. And they were really creating some really cool stuff. And then part 2 is when they were focused more on their project itself. So they were creating images that really, they knew now what they wanted. They liked certain things. For example, if someone did this picture, they knew I wanted more industrial feeling. I wanted a lot of light or less of it. I wanted trees or not, blah, blah, blah. So they kind of knew where they're heading, which was helpful because that's when they can, in project 2, start creating these actual concepts for their projects because they're using these terms, which eventually translate into concept statements. So this is where the spa was actually looking more realistic in that point. The fact that they're using terms such as clouds and translating into bubbles later on can translate into a piece of furniture, but it's just easier at that point to translate. I did not have to, or they did not have to start like coming up with gestures and miming to me. Things were communicated better. And you'll see in some of these images that these rooms or these spaces look closer realistic, which was helping them a lot translate these into actual like Revit or AutoCAD or SketchUp files or whatever they wanted. You'll see here some of these images. I'll show you one more. But the spaces actually started looking more realistic toward the project for the spa. Part 3 is where, okay, now they have an idea what they wanted to do. Now they generate or they create their own individual person, like a room at the spa that is for one person only. And I told them it is okay for them to be that person that wants to be in that room so they can understand why they're making certain decisions. Because it was not an actual client. So with everything they learned from the designers and using AI and what images it was creating for them, they were creating these really nice images. You can see here the student said inspiration from AI, but then translating them into real rooms. So they were taking this image, turning it into a floor plan a certain way, seeing what finishes and colors that can apply to this room, and then start working on it, like I said, with whatever software they're using. So this student was trying to translate these nice curves here in a ceiling and wall to this kind of effect here to create that individual room. Other inspirations were more related to like caves and others. So it was quite challenging for the student to like, how would you even start drawing Revit files for a cave? But the student had a really nice idea where, what if someone actually used, instead of being rooms inside of a space, I'm actually going inside the cave. The lower I go, you'll see here some of her sketches. I get rooms. So this is the mountain on the top, for example, and then you go down to every room. So these are what she was doing before. And then she was taking notes about different finishes and sketches of what she wants it to be like. So the process was really well documented. And you'll see here how she was trying to draw that room more like inspired by those caves and the effects she was getting out of it. Here's another one that was very interesting because the student actually wanted to look at it as if we are the ones being watched by nature rather than having like a greenhouse. What if greenhouse, we are in the greenhouse and nature is outside of it? And actually, there was a moment where she wanted the whole thing to be more like a fish tank, where the fish are looking at us inside the space. And this is where AI was really creating these really nice ideas for her. And then from it, she started creating these other inspirations or iterations of these pods. And you'll see her sketches how she imagined the space to look like. And she was exploring, how do you go up and down this? Is there an elevator because of accessibility and others? What about access to the space and so on? And that was her idea at the end. You'll see here that there's an elevator right in the center, and these are the pods suspended, and this is the space. I'll show you three other examples, and then I'll talk about some of the problems we faced. Here's other examples students worked on. This one right here with a big dome actually was, let me show you the inspiration where it started. Just so you see, actually they were not too far away from where they started. That was the inspiration. And then she ended up with this, and then other images. Here's another one. And then, like I said, they started with individual rooms, but they come up with a full project that came out of the individual rooms. Some of these submissions were posters, and then we did QR codes where instead of typical presentation style where they're just standing in front of their boards, every student scans these QR codes and they are inside the project, so they get to look at it in 360, which made it much more immersive. So some thoughts and limitations, and that will, I'm trying to wrap up this couple more slides and then we can take some questions, is AI does not understand what accessibility is, which was great. I love that it does not give them all answers. When, as much as the students tried to get AI to create accessible spaces, he just created these depressing moments of someone in a wheelchair unable to go in the pool, which I thought was pretty funny. At the same time, physics does not exist. So you'll see the trees are just kind of between glass and metals and so on. But what the funniest moment for me was, and here's an center one, when they were trying to use emotions, such as any term of emotion inside a space, like creates for me a space that I don't know, that makes me feel comfortable or whatever. AI was actually putting actual human things in the space, such as having a face with hands on it to kind of express emotions inside the space. So it's pretty interesting. And again, this is one of the limitations that helped this project very well. So they're not just depending on AI, but at the same time, scale, as you can see, sometimes there's scale issues between the elements. So all of these projects at the end translated also into physical models that were laser cut and 3D printed, and they were part of an exhibit at the end of the semester that was very successful. So yeah, so I'll wrap it up right now. That leaves us with a few minutes, so I'll stop sharing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George, for your presentation. We'll open the floor for some questions. We have like 5-7 minutes before our presentation time ends. So if anyone wants to ask a question for either for me or for George.
Good afternoon. I have a quick question for you, Daniel.
Yes.
That was really an interesting project. Thank you. I was wondering if you thought about a project in which you are asking students to design a space to address, what they define with regards to depression or the problem, whether it's anxiety. So you are creating an environment defining what someone feels. Then as a solution, what would be the space that addresses that? Not the opposite of it, but I'm just curious.
No. So the example that I gave about creating this space for depression is because when I thought of this methodology, I couldn't. It was rooted in my inability to connect with my sister's condition, right? And this, well, it is not meant to be like a therapy or anything like that. Right. So I turned it into a tool for my students where something similar to what George was presenting is that I tell my students, well, we're designing an office space, a commercial space. That's the studio, commercial interior design. But the space has a lobby or has a reception area or has office area or like private offices. So I told my students, what are the sensations that you want to design with? How do you make that idea of being cozy, like George mentioned? So I see a lot of these words in my students' concept statements. A cozy, comfortable space that promotes well-being. It's like, well, yeah, that's everything, right? And nothing at the same time. So what if cozy, the word, the sensation of coziness, is a space in itself? So how would you define it? What color is it? What when I touch it, is it soft? Is it hard? Is it cold? Is it hot? Is it warm? What kind of light is it? So the method invites the student to think of the space phenomenology instead of the physical space itself. That way, it has that it promotes that perception that the student wants to design with, and that gives the student, well, a color palette, a material palette, um, and a lighting palette. So when it's going to engage, when the students going to engage in solving the design, has, let's say, an artistic or aesthetic or a universal direction in which that person is going through, because it's brought from the feeling and perception and sensations that wants to promote. So it can be used for anything. It's a methodology that can be used for like I would propose to George, like, why don't you use it in your spa project with your students and see what comes out of it? You can do a car dealership if you wanted to with it. So the idea is that the students don't have to think right away about solving the project, but think about the perceptions they want to promote as designers, because that's the ultimate thing that people value in spaces. It's how the space makes you feel, and the space speaks to you. So that's what I'm was going for, and that's what I'm going for.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I understand that. I was just tying it to your earlier description. It's hard to define the feelings. And my, one of my research projects was related to the psychiatry departments here at Virginia. And they were talking about how they talk with their patients and what are the spaces, what are the environmental triggers that affect their sensations. So that's why I was asking, but I understand the scope of your project.
And well, I wanted to, for a while, before I turned this into let's say, a pedagogical tool, I wanted it to be used as I wanted to work with psychiatrists and psychologists. So I could sit with them, and I thought this could be a role for interior designers. Like,
Mhm.
what if an interior designer goes to therapy as a therapist, as part of the therapy team, and is able to communicate the feelings that a person has and show them that in space. Like, when you're feeling anxious, this is your space. Like, this is where, like, I can understand you because you're showing me the space where you think you are mentally. And that's why I wanted to do that. So if you want to collaborate and you know someone, because I couldn't find like, when I approached psychiatrists and they were like, oh, this is very interesting. How's the funding like? It's like, I don't have any. So that was basically the barrier. And I said, well, I have to use this somehow. So that's how I turned it into a pedagogical tool. But if you are doing research in this and working with a psychology department, uh, I would gladly, like, give put this into that service.
Definitely, I'll reach out. Thank you.
Okay. Someone else? Well, um, so well, we're up. It's 12, so, or 1 o'clock in the Eastern Coast, and well, we're out of time. And well, we hope you've enjoyed this session of Cafe Connect. In a month, I believe April 24th, not a month exactly, but the last Friday of April, we're gonna have the presentation for Salma, or Professor Salma Alter is gonna present. Sorry, Salma
Salma
Akhtar.
Akhtar.
Salma Akhtar, sorry.
Yes.
She's going to present. She's gonna be the next Cafe Connect presenter. And in May, the last Friday of May, we will have Giovanna Daniels, who's also gonna present and tell us about biodesign and how to use biodesign and design thinking in several design-oriented projects. So those are the two next Cafe Connect sessions, and that's when we're gonna wrap up this spring semester season, and then we'll well advertise our fall semester. If anyone wants to talk about their work, if anyone wants to speak at these Cafe Connect sessions, just reach out and we'll gladly put you in the schedule. And we just meet once a month during active semester, so spring, fall. We don't do summer. A lot of people are out in the summer, so we just use spring and fall semester agendas. So if you want to present, you want to engage with someone else, just send us an email, and we'll gladly put you on the schedule. So I hope to see everyone on April's presentation. You can find the registration link on the IDEC newsletter that's been going out, as well as Giovanna's, which is in the May. The May newsletter will be probably going out soon. So have a nice weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Very nice. Thank you.